support of inclusive excellence in celebration of Black History Month. My name is Amisha Matthews. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I am the program assistant for the UW Oshkosh McNair Scholars Program. I am actually originally from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and I decided to go to UW Oshkosh in 2011 to pursue my bachelor's degree in sociology. And then I went on to get my master's degree in student counseling, student affairs counseling, and school counseling. Then after I graduated, I just decided to reside here in the Oshkosh area because I've enjoyed it so far. Before we begin this event, we would like to take a moment to acknowledge original inhabitants of this area, the Menominee and Ho-Chunk nations. This land encompasses the three of the University of Wisconsin in the Winnebago region. We also recognize the Brotherton Nation. Please take a moment to honor the ancestral grounds and celebrate the resilience and strength that all Indigenous people have shown worldwide. It is now my pleasure to introduce you to our 5 esteemed panelists. We first have Karen Nelson. She is the first Director of Equity and Diversity and Inclusion at Rogers Behavioral Health, after serving as the 7th Diversity and Inclusion Leader for the City of Appleton in the Mayor's Office. Over the course of her career, she has progressed from the corporate setting to the outside consulting and back again. She was the first corporate diversity manager for Shaw Industries, a Berkshire Hathaway company in Delton, Georgia. Shaw is a $6 billion flooring company with 30,000 associates worldwide. Before joining Shaw, she owned her own diversity consulting firm, Nailstar Enterprises in Milwaukee. Prior to that, she worked in a similar capacity as the first African-American female cultural diversity manager for General Electric Medical Systems in Waukesha, Wisconsin, for 10,000 employees in the United States, Latin America, and Canada. She returned to Milwaukee in 2015 and moved to Appleton in 2017. Appointed to the Governor's State Council in the Bureaus of Equity and Diversity, named one of the Wisconsin top 35 Black leaders in 2017 by Madison 365. Awarded for her community leadership, a champion of of the Dignity and Respect campaign by Esther in 2018 and AASD in 2019. Nominated as one of the MDWA's Women of Distinction in 2019 and is the 2020 MLA I Have a Dream Award winner. This member of the Fox Valley Society of Human Resources Management. The NAARHR Milwaukee 2018 Member of the Year and Diamond Life Member of Delta Sigma Theta International Public Service Sorority. Karen Nelson holds a bachelor's degree in chemistry from Bennett College in Greensboro, North Carolina, and an executive MBA from the Luber School of Business Management at the University of Wisconsin, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Nelson is married to Stanford. They have 2 adult children, Sable and Stanford II. Next, we have Dr. Kimberly Barrett. Currently, she serves as the Vice President for the Diversity and Inclusion Associate Dean of the Faculty at the University, at Lawrence University. This position provides leadership for creating a more inclusive campus, which supports each student, faculty, and staff member to help them reach their unique potential. Barrett has more than 30 years of experience working with faculty, students, governing boards, and community members to promote learning, student development, social justice, and diversity. Prior to joining Lawrence, she served as Vice President for Multicultural Affairs and Community Engagement at Wright State University. Before joining Wright State, Dr. Barrett held several administrative positions in higher education in the United States and Canada. Some Some of these include Vice President for Student Affairs, Vice Provost, Director of Multicultural Affairs, and Founding Director of the Women's Center at Moraine State University. She also taught at both the undergraduate and graduate levels and coordinated a graduate program. Dr. Barrett has been active in a variety of community organizations in several states whose goals relate to achieving social and economic justice, including a group in Alabama that started a mental health court diversion program for Shelby County. Some of her civic activities include being a member of Rotary International, 100 Plus Women Who Care, the Leadership Council for the Dayton Area Chamber of Commerce Minority Business Partnership, and serving on the board of directors for United Way of Greater Dayton. In addition, she was the recipient of the first Diversity First Award from the National Diversity Council. Currently, she serves on several local boards, including the Fox Cities Chamber of Commerce, Harbor House Domestic Abuse Programs, and the Berkshire Miller Museum of Glass. She is also a member of the Imagine Fox Cities coordinating team, a regional visioning initiative. Dr. Barrett has also made numerous presentations at regional, national, and international conferences. Some of her notable talks include Diversity, Education, and Public Good, and 10 Years of Breaking Glass, a Black feminist reflects on equity in higher education. She's authored articles published in professional journals and newspapers, and for more than 25 years has served as a diversity consultant. Kimberly Barrett obtained her PhD in Higher Education Administration from Southern Illinois University, Carbondale, and her master's degree in clinical psychology from Murray State University, and her bachelor's degree in psychology from Pfeiffer College in Missouri, North Carolina. Please forgive me if I said that incorrectly. Next, we have Dr. Damara Grady. She's an established role model and advocate for equity and social justice. Dr. Grady's desire is to forge multidisciplinary partnerships, both on campus and off, that create leadership opportunities and support student success and social mobility. Dr. Grady begins an extensive leadership background in student support and works tirelessly at refining processes, policies, and programs that support an inclusive educational environment. Having served as an adjunct faculty member for many years, Dr. Grady believes student success is the net product of successful collaboration between academic and student affairs. As the Associate Vice Chancellor for the Academic of Inclusive Excellence and Chief Diversity Officer, Dr. Grady leads the development of student programs and students and support services in the Division of Academic Support of Inclusive Excellence. Through this work, Dr. Grady is committed to engaging in purposeful learning and dialogue, shared leadership, and action that serve to ensure a sense of community and belonging for all students, including Black, Brown, Asian, and/or Pacific Islander, Latino, Latina, Latinx, Hispanic, and Indigenous students who are differently abled or neurodiverse, students who experience poverty, students of different religious faiths, students of different gender and sexual identities, students who are culturally and linguistically diverse, and their intersections. She is also a licensed professional counselor and utilizes those skills to ensure that all programming, policies, and procedures consider the whole student. Dr. Grady, a first-generation college graduate, holds a PhD in the advancement of learning and service in higher education from Cardinal Stritch University, a Master's of Science in Education Psychology with an emphasis in community counseling from the UW-Milwaukee, and a Bachelor of Science in Educational Studies from UW-Milwaukee. Next, we have Laurie Schneider. For over 35 years, Laurie has been fighting oppression and inequality. For the first 20 years, it was personal, fighting for basic survival through poverty, hunger, homelessness, and due to domestic violence, and the quandary of racial identity. For the past decade and a half, it has also been professional, leading work that disrupts systems of racism and oppression in schools and community. She currently serves as the district coordinator for the equity for the Fond du Lac School District, where she leads development and implementation of an equity framework that advances the academic success for all students. Prior to this position, she spent 4 years serving as a diversity relations manager and equal opportunity officer, student for Moraine Park Technical College in Fond du Lac, Wisconsin. Laurie has successfully built the capacity for cultural responsiveness in the community in many ways. Her most recent initiative has been co-founding the Humanity Project, telling the untold story, which is the first ever community conversation in the Fond du Lac focused on exposing the history of people of color in the United States. It is a year-long project that brings individuals together with the purpose of gaining racial understanding about themselves and the people around them. Laurie facilitates the use of protocols and conditions that isolate race in personal and immediate ways, while also focusing on efforts to reduce devastating impact of systematic racism. Laurie also established a district equity leadership team, which engages district administrators, community members, and parents to develop racial consciousness and culturally relevant practices that reduces racial disparities in achievement. A Green Bay native, Laurie graduated from Green Bay West High School in 2001. She earned a bachelor's of arts degree in sociology and Spanish, with an emphasis in social work from the University of Stevens Point in 2005, and a master's degree in cultural foundations in education from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee in 2012. She has served as the National AmeriCorps volunteer in upstate New York, a Boys and Girls Club director, and a YMCA family camp director. Laurie is passionate about creating a society where every individual is validated for who they are and not marginalized for who they are not. Laurie lives in Fond du Lac, Wisconsin, and is married with 3 daughters. We also have Leslie G. Lester. She's a multiracial professional with a master's degree in school counseling who grew up in Iron Mountain, Michigan. She attended Lakeland College and has been a member of Sheboygan community for over 20 years, actively involved in MS Walks, March of Dimes, her church, coaching girls sports, and many more. Leslie is the mother of 3 boys, and her husband, Santonio, both work diligently with a new local nonprofit, the Black American Community Outreach, in an effort to unify the people who live there. Leslie loves a good craft and her English Miss Lucy Liu. Currently, she works diligently at the Moraine Park Technical College as an Associate Director for Diversity and Inclusion, and will begin her LLC work in January, mentoring teens and preteens with programs that promote self-awareness, goal setting, financial literacy, and leadership. So now I would like to ask the panelists a few questions. And we can start with Karen and Nelson. The first question I would like to ask is, what successes in your effort to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion bring you pride and joy?
Pride and joy for me comes in the form of having kicked off the diversity, the Dignity and Respect campaign in the city of Appleton. I was just hearing a little feedback there. So it sounds like that's been adjusted. Thank you. The Dignity and Respect campaign that was launched by me in partnership with my sister in diversity, Dr. Kimberly Barrett at Lawrence University back in 2018. And to be able to now take that template, if you will, into my new role at Rogers Behavioral Health. And then if I can sneak in one more, and that is that then led to the creation of the GARE initiative, which is the Governmental Alliance on Race and Equity, which is the work that I'm leading at the City of Appleton, or have left at the City of Appleton, that focuses in specifically by leading with racial equity. And that actually brought us to the 4th year of the Dignity and Respect campaign. That's what I'm most proud of.
Wow, thank you for that. Dr. Grady, what successes in your effort to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion bring you pride and joy?
I think there's too many to name. When I saw that question, I said to myself, how am I going to answer this? Of course, being the new Chief Diversity Officer at UW Oshkosh, I know I had a sense of pride when I arrived on campus and I realized that there are so many people who are really immersed in this work and wanting to help me in my role. Not only support me, but people would reach out and say, what can I do? This is what I'm doing. Is it enough? Should I stop? How can I support you? And really amplifying my voice. So I think my biggest success, or what I've enjoyed, is amplifying the voices of others in this role as well. I think there have been some invisible people, students and employees on campus who just haven't had a chance to have a seat at the table, someone to be an advocate and a champion for them. So I have been enjoying being positioned to be that. Another success this year, I have been on the African American Chamber of Commerce of Wisconsin board for a couple years, and it's in Milwaukee. And when I took the job in Oshkosh, I said, well, I'm moving to Oshkosh. I don't know if you still want me to be on your board. And they said, we serve the whole state and we need to figure out how do we start branching out. I think oftentimes what happens is communities stay within communities, especially when we are Black and Brown. We don't support each other's efforts around the state. So I feel that on the board, we've begun to think about, well, how do we reach out to other chambers or work that's being done across the state and make sure that we're holding space and amplifying their work. So amplifying others' works and giving chairs to people who have been marginalized has been one of the biggest things that has been a success for me, or something I've really leaned on over the last 6 months.
Thank you. Dr. Barrett, what successes in your effort to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion bring you pride and joy?
Well, I think generally speaking, the efforts that bring me the most pride and joy are those that really transform institutions, organizations, or communities, whether it's policies to change the way that we hire folks so that we get more diversity and better applicants, or centers that help change the culture of an organization. For example, when I was at Murray State, I was a founding director of a women's center, and it brought me a lot of pride to be invited back for the 10-year anniversary and the 20-year anniversary of that organization. And since you're part of the UW system, at UW Eau Claire, I helped start a women's and gender equity center that has morphed into a center at UW Eau Claire that addresses both gender equity and LGBTQ issues. And so just to see these types of programs, projects really stand the test of time and be able to change and morph given the needs of the institution really brings me a lot of pride.
Thank you so much. And then we have Laurie.
Hi, good
What successes in your What successes in your effort to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion bring you pride and joy?
Yeah, so I thought about this question from a general sense as well. And for me, the top two things really are learning and relationships. I love the learning. that goes along with this work, and for all the learning that I see and engage with. I realize there's so much more that I don't know, and so that really fuels my passion. And then the relationships, absolutely. I love engaging, just even having one-on-one conversations. I love engaging groups of people within my organization, also within the community. As in my bio mentioned, the Humanity Project has been something that's been just so near and dear to my heart, because it really has been an organic effort of concerned citizens coming together and say, how do we do this? And kind of building it as I go, or as we go, I should say. And so just the relationships that develop are just so critical. And I love that in my current role within the school district, and in the way that we are learning and applying an equity framework, I love the opportunity to engage and coach our district leaders and our building principals and our teachers and our staff as they develop their own capacity to lead this work as well. And so that comes with both supporting and empowering and encouraging, and then also being a critical friend. And with that, I think relationships develop and strengthen, and that really is what fuels my passion for this work.
Awesome, thank you. And then Leslie, what successes in your effort to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion bring you pride and joy?
I would have to say some things are similar as far as work goes. I think here at MPTC, I not only have a seat, but I have a voice at the table. And I think that's incredibly important in doing this work. It's allowed me to advance my team by 40%, and then more initiatives and more programming. Personally, starting a nonprofit, the Black American Community Outreach in my community where I live, has been incredibly rewarding. I'm the Director of Education and Leadership there. My previous institution, I created the first Center for Equity, Engagement, and Belonging. It was a diversity center, so that brought me a lot of joy. And most recently, because like Laurie said, I'm always learning. This area is always changing and growing. So I just received a certification through Cornell that, again, the institution where I work at supported. So those would be maybe my top ones.
Thank you so much. You all have done some really amazing things. I'm so excited to read up on it and look for it. The next question I have for you all would be, what challenges have you experienced in advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion? And we will start with Dr. Grady first.
Too many to name, but I will tell you my biggest challenge during a pandemic is people are distracted, one. And then during the pandemic, there were many hot spots of social unrest that has been sometimes miscategorized. And so I've seen people also want to be a part of the work, realizing it's maybe lucrative work and wanting to use privilege for profit. And so sometimes my biggest challenge is understanding people's why and helping people understand what diversity, equity, and inclusion means, and having a shared understanding of the work, and that yes, there's personal levels of it, but there's also a structural and cultural level, especially when you work in higher education, that needs to be addressed. And when people are distracted, we sometimes focus more on training on the personal level, where the structure never gets adjusted, so real change doesn't happen for the students or people who are impacted. My biggest challenge is getting people to have a shared vision of the work, collaborate. If you work in diversity, equity, inclusion, you will hear us on the call say all the great things we're doing, but money is not always there. It kind of ebb and flows depending on how spotlighted the work is. And so when budgets are cut, sometimes resources are cut for this work. So sometimes doing this work comes with not a lot of resources, so you kind of have to pivot and really be passionate behind what you're doing to really push things forward. So getting people to not only want change, but be committed to that it's not a one size fits all. Sometimes it takes years of planning just to implement an initiative that's really going to be impactful, that you'll have to evaluate and keep evaluating, because as cultures change, so do the populations of students and stakeholders that we're serving. So as our customers change, we have to change our diversity lens with that. And so getting people to understand that it's just not a one-time training, that you can't just have someone read a book and then things are better, that sometimes by happenstance, things do get better, but there has to be metrics involved to really implement change at a structural and cultural level to really impact our customers that we serve every day. So getting people to understand it's exhausting too. It's exhausting work sometimes and taxing emotionally on those who lead the effort. So usually I have a smile on my face, but if you could see what's going on in my head half the time, you would say, okay, she needs a hug. But it's not an easy job. And sometimes people will say, well, why don't we do something now? Why can't you act? Or why can't you tell people what to do? And sometimes you have to meet people where they're at and help them process the material before you can really tell them or show them what's the next step. So sometimes wanting change, but I have to meet people where they're at so we can have a shared vision and an understanding on how collaboration will work and look.
Thank you. And then what challenges have you experienced in advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion? Karen?
Your mic cut out a little bit, so I didn't quite hear my name. Thank you. I'm going to take us all the way back to my beginning in the whole space of something called diversity that I don't even think we were even saying that back then, which was my departure from my degree, my original degree, which was being one of the first African-American chemists for a cosmetic manufacturing firm who was not quite ready to embrace this newfound emerging market world that we now live in, and was flat out rejected with the whole concept of moving marketing and formulae into the realm of emerging markets, namely diversity, equity, and inclusion that we now call it. And as devastating as that was for me as a young Black female scientist, I took that departure and that rejection, that flat out rejection, that's not the America that my particular immediate manager could ever fathom or envision, to then chart my own course, to find my own path forward, to say, this is the work that I'm going to commit the rest of my career to. And I find it now sometimes endearing, sometimes angrily, in terms of looking at how far we've come in these many decades that I've been now doing the work, to realizing that there's just some parts of the population that I don't know if we'll ever reach. And as much as we may never change their belief system or their values, the challenge still remains that we must change their behavior. Their behavior in the workplace must mirror the values of diversity, equity, and inclusion, even if they don't quite believe it themselves. One of my most famous quotes in the Post-Crescent was when I said, I don't care if you're a card-carrying member of the Ku Klux Klan. When you walk into these places of business, you need to embrace diversity, equity, and inclusion and act like you know it. That's my challenge.
Can I jump in? Lauren Sullivan, can you turn off your camera? We can see you eating and talking since there's not a lot of people on camera. Lauren, can you turn off your camera? Thank you.
That's one of your students. Thank you.
And then we'll have Leslie. What challenges have you experienced in advancing diversity, equity, and
I think one of the biggest challenges is that this is not something new, and it's not a hot topic, and it's not a buzzword. Obviously, the murder of George Floyd kind of brought things more in people's faces that maybe it wasn't before for some of us, it was always there. And so getting people to understand that this is something we've been talking about for a long time. Also defining diversity versus inclusion, right? They're not the same thing. Defining equity versus equality. I just had a presentation where we talked about that, and I was thankful that people asked that question. Well, tell me again the difference. And I was, like I said, very thankful because there is one. And then, you know, just getting the work that we do to be infused. It's not, I don't want it just to be something that they have to ask me about. You know, if I'm doing my job correctly, eventually that the work that we're doing is infused in what everybody is doing. I love that they call, I think it was Dr. Grady said, when people are asking her, like, you know, can you read this policy? You can check this out. You know, they're doing that here too at MPTC, and I feel incredibly valued that that's happening. But I also want it to be, it's just natural, it's organic, you know, and getting that to happen is a challenge again with the pandemic, you know, and as far as like the programming that we do, I feel like, am I reaching enough students? Am I reaching enough of our employees when everybody is virtual and we don't have a lot of people in our building? And so that is added to an already tough dynamic of, do we have to do that, you know, or is it just something that you want to do? And it's, no, this is necessary for all of us to work in a space that we feel we belong in.
Thank you. And then Dr. Barrett, what challenges have you experienced in advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Well, I can certainly relate to the challenges that everyone who's spoken previously has talked about. And I would really put them in two categories. One is helping organizations understand that diversity, equity, and inclusion is a sort of cultural competence, a critical competence for everyone in the organization. It's not something that's done by just the diversity office, but there are ways that it impacts and improves the work that we do in all of our areas, whether it's people who take care of the facilities for us, the food service, to the president, the deans, directors, everyone. And so I think that's sort of the first challenge, and that is related to many of the things that we've heard about making sure that people take responsibility and understand their role related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And the other challenge is pretty basic. And it's, you know, when you talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, particularly the diversity piece, it's really about identity. And so how do we help people understand that this is about them? And in particular, how do we move beyond the defensiveness? Because when we talk about changing the way we look at different groups of people, we're talking about changing the way people see themselves. And it really begins with each of us as individuals, although the real change is going to come at the organizational level. It really starts with each of us being able to understand who we are, our blind spots, and then to begin to accept other folks. And so I think, number one, helping people understand how this impacts every aspect of the organization. And number two, helping individuals move beyond the defensiveness that comes from sort of challenging and pushing them on the way they see themselves and other folks.
Thank you. And then we have Laurie. What challenges have you experienced in advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Yeah, I would also like to echo the challenges that have been already stated. And I think one of the pieces of specific challenge I think that I've faced is organizations having quote, you know, the position before really being committed to the work, and thus I think the weight falling on the shoulders of the position in the institutions seeing it as, well, this all goes through the diversity office. This all goes to, to Laurie, she's the diversity person, and not taking the responsibility of really understanding that the work is everybody's work. Everyone has a role. And one of the things that I feel like we're making great progress within the Fond du Lac School District now is really thinking that every decision has to be made through an equity lens. So it's not just equity work or diversity work when diversity is mentioned, but every decision, when you're making financial decisions, when you're thinking about staffing, when you're thinking about everything that we do, not just perhaps what people think of as, the common diversity work. So that's been a way that I think in overcoming this huge challenge that I've seen in my course, in my time being involved with diversity, equity, and inclusion work. I also want to echo the challenge of just the work is, for me, personal and professional. And so I don't have the luxury of, and I would suspect that and many of you kind of spoke to the exhaustion. And so not being able to take the hat off, take the work clothes off, and kind of leave it at the door, leave it at the office, going into, the community, and also being impacted by diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think about a challenge also in the namesake of saying, being committed to the work, but then the actions aren't matching. And a specific example I can think of, examples, because unfortunately it's happened many times, is being in environments, organizations, businesses, community places, and spaces where you have some sort of diversity statement or sticker or something that's hung up. And then as a person of color and a person who identifies with many identities that historically have been marginalized, being treated very poorly in those exact spaces. And so I think about that kind of double whammy or double duty being a huge challenge. And I think that's growing over time, being able to really find a support network. And really, I think it was Dr. Grady kind of talked about the self-care and really finding your people to overcome that, because I think that it certainly can take a big toll. And I think generally in positions of diversity, equity, and inclusion, especially in administration, there is high burnout and exhaustion. And so really being able to take care of yourself and give yourself permission to do that, and then take care of each other.
Thank you. So the next question I have is, how does your positionality as a Black woman shape your work in diversity, equity, and inclusion? And I'll give you all a little bit, if you need a little bit to ponder that one for a little while. And I'll say it again. How does your positionality as a Black woman shape your work in diversity, equity, and inclusion? Dr. Barrett, would you like to go first?
Sure, I'm happy to go first. Great. That's a very interesting question, and really speaks to some of the issues that you heard earlier about self-care and not being able to sort of step away from these issues because we live it. And Black feminist scholars talk about this concept of being the outsider within. You are a person who might represent several marginalized groups, but you have a position which puts you sort of inside the halls of power. And so while you have an opportunity to bring a new perspective to that, you still are dealing with the challenges related to exclusion, oppression, sexism, racism, whatever the ism might be. And so while it provides a very valuable and unique perspective for the institution, it also puts you in the situation of being between two worlds. And so that brings with it, some very valuable assets, but it also brings some challenges. So I say for me, you know, being the outsider within is how I would characterize my positionality within the leadership of an organization.
Thank you, Dr. Barrett. And Leslie?
So I've looked at this question for a few days now. And I think I want to kind of echo some of the stuff that Laurie said. It's because, and it's for all of us on this panel, of course, you know, because it's personal. And pretty much every meeting I walk into, I'm the only person that looks like me, male or female. I think there's an advantage in the sense that I know how I carry myself. I know what I bring with me to that meeting as far as my background and experiences and my education, my poise. And so I feel I can represent well. At the same time, there's sometimes, you know, in the back of your mind, if things don't go well, or if I assert myself, I have experienced people saying to a supervisor that I was aggressive, when I'll play it back in my head a million times, and I know I was not. I was assertive, but I was a female of color being assertive. And so I think there is a luxury and a gift that was given to me in these positions and with what I bring to the table. But there's also, like Laurice was saying, and you know, that personal part where you go home and sometimes you feel really defeated and you feel exhausted. And I don't get to, you know, unzip and be a different race or color. I am who I am. And so this is a really interesting question that I'm going to continue to think about. But I do like being the only one that looks like me at times. And then at times I do recognize the struggle, and I think it's just, you know, it's a unique position. I can bring empathy and sympathy where some people can only have empathy. So thank you.
Thank you. And then Karen?
Our very being of being Black women, we are the epitome of what diversity and inclusion is, because we are, if I may use an old term from decades ago, a twofer. We bring with us the Blackness that we are, so we can be proud and Black and stand up for our Blackness and our Black issues in our Black community. But guess what? We can't divorce that from our gender identity too, of being women. And so we bring all women with us with everything that we advocate for in our positions. So our positionality is quite unique as Black women in the work that we do, because we bring all women with us. We bring all other people of color with us also by default of being Black. So I think that makes us uniquely qualified to do the work that we do.
Thank you. Laurice?
Yeah, like others, this question really has had me thinking the last few days, and really thinking about, you know, what does my position as a Black woman and how that's influenced my work. And not to repeat what others have said, one aspect that I think I really have gravitated towards, and kind of goes off of the heels of what Karen just shared, but really I think the togetherness of Black women, and being in positions to be around other strong Black women and empower. I love that saying about empowered women empower women, because I think that's so true. And in my work, and not growing up in a community that had a lot of Black women, that certainly has been starting really honestly with my undergraduate work and being part of Black Student Union. And then that really has propelled forward, being immersed around other strong, beautiful, just resilient Black women. And so in one way that I thought about this question is just having that incredible opportunity, and also having, it comes with a certain weight as well. And I think Leslie spoke to that. But I think it's an incredible opportunity to really change the narrative, so others can see. I think Black women know who they are and know what we represent and know our strengths and our gifts. But I don't believe that that's been the narrative in the larger context of society. And so I feel really compelled in this work to lift up the voices, lift up the work, lift up all of what has brought us this far, in the position of being a Black woman. And I think just one, I guess, experiences that really speak to that is the number of Black women who I have looked up to in my work. And I think about especially my time at Moraine Park, because that was the first time that I had started working with students that were older than me, students that I had that really, I feel like I could be their children, and in communicating and sharing with me that they looked up to me, and how we had just such a special exchange back and forth. And so I think that really kind of speaks to what I just shared, because I think it's a whole community of just incredible women. And I think this position really allows me to, or this type of work in this position really allows me to elevate our work and our narrative.
Thank you. And then Dr. Grady.
I echo everything that has been said by my colleagues on the call, and I want to personally make sure I thank you for the work that you do at your organizations, and your work has inspired me. Please know that. I also would say that, I know that we talk oftentimes as Black women leading diversity, equity, inclusion about the exhaustion, but I also have to sometimes remind myself of the privilege I have to hold this seat. And sometimes what happens is we get pigeonholed or tokenized to be, if there needs to be a seat of a Black woman, we are typically the person leading diversity issues. That's our role. And I think it positions us to, I think Leslie said it earlier, or I don't know if it was Leslie, but to say that we need to look at everything through an equity lens, not just the person leading the charge, but that person's going to be knowledgeable about institutional effectiveness, research, admissions for our students, what happens in residential life. So we're not just doing specialized programming or reaching out to the Black and Brown and underserved students, but making sure that it's immersed throughout our institutions. So I think about that privilege, and I remind people that we're not monolithic. Some of us are better equipped emotionally to deal with some of the exhaustion that comes with this work. So what I have done, and I share this often, is I set up boundaries as well. That one thing I don't do is get in the arena to debate my oppression with people. I hold space for everybody, but that is my boundary, that I don't debate my oppression with people. I'm not the diversity whisperer, so I don't want to give you my personalized view on why such kid did this or why some groups like certain foods. I don't want to be that person. I want to hold space and I want to hold boundaries, because I think we need to remember that this is an important intersection, being a woman, but being a Black woman, and what that not only means for us personally, but just the combat fatigue that can come from going into spaces and utilizing that privilege of a seat to really fight for those who are going to come behind us. So I look forward oftentimes to my mentors, but also I have to remind myself, if I let certain things go, if I let certain people say things and I don't correct them, I'm not only setting up my daughter for an experience where she's going to experience the same oppressions I have, but other young Black women. So I use my position and look at it as a place of privilege to not only educate, but pave way. So how can I amplify voices? How can I make sure I'm giving up seat, giving up space, holding space when needed, but also having proper boundaries with individuals?
Thank you. The next question I have is, what do you want folks to know about Black women leading diversity, equity, and inclusion? And what are some examples of ways folks can support you and other Black women doing this? Let's start with Laurie.
Oops, there we go. So yeah, a couple of things that come to my mind. I think one, it goes back to one of earlier challenges and talking about this work being everyone's work. So I think what I would like for people to know is that many times being Black women in positions of DEI leadership, many times I think what comes out of our mouth is kind of what people would typically say, like, well, of course Laurice would say that, or the message, I believe messages can be seen different. And so what I think about, what people could do is, one thing I really think about is being able to, how can individuals share those messages? If you think Laurice would say that, how could you say that? Because in positions or institutions that are predominantly, white middle class, that messages of the critical nature of this work, diversity, equity, and inclusion, coming from a voice that represents that dominant discourse is a very different message than the typical diversity person. So I think that's one thing, is really being able to, again, how do you make this work your work? And then I think for other Black women doing this work, the other thing I'll say, and let my colleagues continue to add on and share their thoughts with this question, is really building your network and reaching out. And I think especially, in all the different sectors of education that we represent even now, I think we have, diversity circles within those sectors. But one of the things I was thinking about, even just in thinking about this panel today, is, as I looked around the screen, it's, I know each one of you, I know your names, I know your positions, and I haven't made it even my own personal commitment to reach out personally to you. And so I think about a few of you I have, but not everyone. And I think that's a missed opportunity. So I think about the question about what other Black women leading this work could do as well, or in positions as such, is really be intentional about building your network and having your go-to people that you can just call when you have those moments and you're just like, oh gosh, I just need someone to get me. I need to be able to let my hair down and not have to navigate all the other things you do when you're in typical spaces, and Leslie said it earlier, when you show up and you're the only Black woman in the room, you're the DEI person. And so it's like the weight's right there, but you need to just call someone or talk to someone, chat someone, however you reach out and just say, I got to run this by you, or, just having that thought partner who is in a similar position. So I would say that moving forward.
Thank you. Leslie?
The first part of the question, I would say, our work is all encompassing. Sometimes I think people assume we have one agenda because of our identity, and that's obviously not the case. We're diversity, equity, inclusion. It's all encompassing. Also, it's not my work, right? I want it to be our work, whether it's where I work, my community, places within my community. It's about everybody coming together for this work. It's not my initiative. It's a necessary infusion. I don't even like the word initiative. It's part of what we do. As far as what people can do, like Laurice just said, we have to check in because we live this work, but also check in with people. It doesn't take a lot to shoot someone a message. I mean, I haven't been at Moraine Park a year, and it was only a few months when the social unrest really started to happen, and people that I don't even know felt comfortable to just shoot me an email and I'm just checking in to see how you're doing. And it meant a lot. It really, really did. So check in with people. speak up and speak out. You know, I can only be so many places, as well as the panelists. You know, we can't be everywhere where we're working. So if you hear something that isn't right, or you see something that isn't right, it's everyone's responsibility to say something about it. You know, and then I just think there's a lot of strength on this panel. You can hear it in the panelists' voices. And Larice, you made a great point about, I haven't reached out to you, Larice, we've spoke, but, you know, when I saw even the bios, I was like, wow, you know, this is in my backyard and I didn't even know it. As someone who's always kind of looked for a mentor that looked like me, I'm like, look at these amazing women doing these amazing things. So, you know, if you're wondering what to do, start with educating yourself, and then just focus on being an anti-racist, being someone who's willing to do the work alongside those of us who are doing the work.
Thank you. Dr. Grady?
I like what my colleagues have said before me, and I would just add, you know, for me, I often am described as not militant. I've been called that, more so the what if person. I'm always the person in the room that says, well, what if this happens? I try to make sure that I'm always looking through the lens of the most vulnerable person when it comes to initiative, a program, an idea, a curriculum, who would be most impacted or affected by this message, or what's going to be shown or done. And sometimes I need, and so I ask for grace and patience, because to the points that were made earlier, I am not just the person as a Black woman who's here to talk about Black and white issues. And sometimes that's surprising to people, that I want to talk about students with disabilities. I want to talk about our students who have children. I want to talk about our students who aged out of foster care, our students who are veterans, our students who are in non-traditional occupations. And sometimes, because of my position as diversity officer and I'm a Black woman, I get approached more so about race-based issues, and when it's race-based, it's Black and white. And so I challenge people to think about diversity, equity, inclusion, and access through different lenses, and who's impacted and the most vulnerable through those lenses. And it's not always going to be about race. There's going to be other intersections of privilege and power that we need to continue to talk about. And so, as been said before, it's everybody's work, but I think sometimes when we challenge each other, we also don't filter what we're saying through the lens of, is this person vulnerable? Can I meet them where they're at? And am I challenging them in a way that's going to feed on their oppression? If I'm doing that, I'm inflicting violence on them. And so I would say what I need mostly and would advocate for others to have is just grace and patience. And I also tell people, if I could, in 1 month and 1 day and 1 word and 1 program, stop or combat 200 years of systematic oppression, I'd probably be doing something else with my life. I don't know what that job would be, but I would be saving the world in a bigger scale, which maybe one day I will if I figure out that formula. But it really takes time. When things happen, like over the summer, when we saw the murder of George Floyd, I would get in my inbox, what are we going to do? We need to take action. We need to do something now. And when I would say, yeah, we can do that. Maybe we need a little bit more strategy behind this. We could do that, but it's not going to stop everything right away. And so people get exhausted and stop wanting to help. And so as I push through my own fatigue to keep fighting, I would ask others too to push through their fatigue and know that I'm here to champion others who are exhausted, for us to lean on each other, but not to further oppress or minimize or marginalize each other. Let's work together.
Thank you. Karen?
I want to amplify women's voices. And when I speak, I love hearing, and I think Dr. Grady said it first, to amplify other women's voices, even when it's not your own. It reminds me of the quote from Mary Church Terrell, of lifting as we climb, as she did now almost 100 years ago, where we offer support in meetings, giving other women space to speak freely, not always having to be the dominant voice in the room, if and when we're lucky enough to not be the only one, which is rare, admittedly. Give recognition and encouragement. Provide mentorship where possible. I know some organizations have formal mentorship programs, but I'm talking about even just taking it on an individual basis. I see a couple of my mentees on the participants list, and I'm proud to call them that, and I'm proud for them to call me their mentor, because I believe another one of our esteemed panelists have already said, empowered women empower women. So let's just keep that going. Giving opportunities to other women with potential. I was so heartened by the fact that literally the same week that I was leaving one job and starting another, I got the call from Dr. Grady. She chased me down into my new position and found me and said, please tell me you're going to still be on the panel. I'm just so heartened by that it wasn't just a transactional thing that we got to know each other in my former role, but now it becomes more relational. And then, of course, to give a shout out to my sister, Dr. Barrett, whenever I'd have those moments where I just need to exhale, when I could just pick up the phone, dial her in, and there she is, and being that comforting word. And I can't wait to get to know our newest panel members, Laurie and Leslie, on that more personal level as well, because we are here for each other and we need to continue to be there. And then finally, offer flexibility at work. One of the traps I've seen a lot of women in power fall into, as they sometimes, not any of us on this call, not any of my esteemed colleagues on this panel, but I've seen a lot of white women, I'll just say that because that's who I've seen do this more than women of color, sometimes fall into that trap of thinking they've got to do it the old boys way and not offer that kind of flexibility for other women as they come along. So my reminder to all of us, or my advice, is to lift as we climb.
Thank you. And then we have Dr. Barrett.
Hi. I guess for the first question, in terms of what I want folks to know about Black women leading diversity, equity, and inclusion work, I would say two things. First, as you've seen on this panel, we're not monolithic. So don't assume that you know what we're going to be talking about, our perspectives or our approach. Get to know us as individuals. So we're not monolithic. And I think related to that, this work really prepares people who are doing it for other leadership positions outside of diversity, equity, and inclusion. You've heard how this work touches every part of an organization. And so it really sets the foundation and gives people the knowledge and skills that will allow them to lead in a number of roles, including, president or CEO or vice president in some other area. And so I think I would say, remember that we're not monolithic. And second, keep in mind that this really is a great training ground for leadership in general. Second, for the second question, what do I want? What are examples of ways folks can support me and other Black women doing this work? I would ask folks who look like us and are share some of the identities, our marginalized identities, that they serve as ambassadors for us to communities of color, to other groups of women and other groups out there. Sometimes because we are the outsider within, we're that person who is part of the administration, part of leadership. Not only do we deal with the microaggressions of being in that space, but we also start to be looked upon with suspicion by folks in our own sort of marginalized groups. And so I would ask that folks who share my identity would be ambassadors to others in our groups. The second thing I would do for people who are in positions of power, I would ask that they be sponsors, that they pave the way for this work and remove some of the political obstacles that might be in the way for us that we might not even be aware of. So to serve as sponsors. And then I would say for just anyone out there interested in supporting the work that we do, to be an ally, to take it upon yourself to learn about these issues and to make our cause your cause. So that's what I would ask people to do to support me and others like me in this work, is to be ambassadors, be sponsors, and be allies.
Thank you so much. I want to thank all of you for all of your responses to these questions. I also now want to open up the questions. If anyone has any questions, please raise your hand and then I'll call on you by name if you have any questions for these panelists. You can also put questions in the chat box if you have any questions. Kaworski, forgive me if I said your name correctly, your last name correctly.
That's okay. Can you hear me okay? Oh, I gotta put my camera on here. There we go. My name is Jean Koterski, and I work at UW Oshkosh. I currently work with, it doesn't really matter who I work with. I work a lot with students, and but my question really has to do with something that's going on just in our communities, obviously related to with the George Floyd situation and other situations, that there's been that police brutality. I know nobody's going to have the exact answer, but if there are ways or things that you have thought about it yourselves of ways that communities can change this, right? Whether I know there's people who say defund the police. There's people who say there has to be, different training or whatever the situation is. But I guess I'd like to hear your thoughts if you have ways that we could work, even our own communities here or Minneapolis or wherever it is that this is occurring, to really make that systemic change, coming from whether it be people who look like me with white skin, or people who are Black or brown, or other people of color, just ways to get that change happening where there doesn't have to be the rioting or violence, because I don't know if that's going to help, and I guess I'm just trying to come up with a way that I, as a person, can help make that change, or be an advocate for that change, and just wondering your thoughts on that. Thank you.
I don't know if we should raise our hands to speak. I'll give it a shot.
No, you can go ahead and speak.
This is Kimberly Barrett. I'll give it a shot. I think that the protests were important to raise awareness, but now that we're aware of these issues that have been going on for hundreds of years in our society, I think there is more of a desire across the board on the parts of citizens and police to make change. And so I think while there does need to be certain changes made in laws, about use of force and other things, I think that on the ground, what we as individuals can do is begin to listen and talk to each other. I think, what I've tried to do in collaboration with Karen Nelson when she was coordinator of diversity and inclusion for the city of Appleton, and in collaboration with the police chief, is keep those lines of communication open. And some of the things that we haven't been able to do because of the pandemic and other things is really provide opportunities for police and young people to sort of meet and get to know each other so that we can see each other as human beings, decrease that implicit bias, and rebuild that trust, because trust has been lost, and I think for good reason. But how do we begin at the just very basic relationship level to begin to build that trust? And so that means that each of us have to take a step towards each other to build those bridges. And so, you know, when I was in Dayton, Ohio, the Dayton Police Department there would actually have, you know, days where they would have picnics and sort of carnivals almost, information sessions in low-income housing areas where they would get to know young kids, they would give them treats, they would have nonprofits there who could provide, you know, information. I would be there as a representative of a university to tell people about opportunities for higher education. And so really getting back to this idea of community policing so that people can begin to trust and get to know the police that are there to protect and serve them. And that's in addition to the legal and structural changes that are going to need to happen as well.
Yeah, thank you. And if I could actually jump in on that, I would love to share a little bit of what we've started in the city of Fond du Lac. I believe we have a really good relationship with our police department, and everything that was just stated about, you know, the relationship and the trust. I think it, you know, trusting individuals to even have the conversation is so key. And so, for example, and not at all will I pretend that we're doing everything right. We certainly made many mistakes along the way. But I think about even right after the murder of George Floyd, a number of us that have been around the diversity circles and our advocacy groups in town were able to personally reach out to the administration of the police department and say, we need to talk about this, like this can't happen. And to even have that conversation within, you know, days was incredible, I think, as I've learned and been, you know, just as you network around, a lot of people are like, how did you even start that? And I think it starts, you know, much more before tragedy strikes. And so it's how do you have ongoing relationships with your police department. We are also, you know, one of the things that has been really key for us is meeting people where they're at and recognizing that, you know, the structures of white supremacy exist. And so, for example, when we have community meetings, there was another situation this summer that community members brought forward, and we sat down as community members and administration from our police department and had a discussion, and those conversations take place off-site, so not at the police department. That's been really key, and just really, you know, for our department to recognize that even walking into a police station to have a conversation certainly comes with a very different weight as people of color. And so, so that's been a way that we've been able to build the trust. And we actually are right in the process of creating a dialogue series, as Dr. Barrett just talked about, you know, having those conversations and getting to know people as people and as individuals. And so we are starting a Courageous Conversation dialogue series that's going to be very intimate conversations to be able to really get to know and have, you know, conversations around some of the things that are certainly you know, that are impacting all of us. And I think, you know, obviously we have a long history of talking about police brutality and systemic racism in our criminal justice system. And I also think that within that conversation, I think because of that history, our Black and Brown communities also, if they're not a part of law enforcement, also have a great growth opportunity to learn about, you know, law enforcement and people. And so coming together, and I think our premise really is, how do we all coexist and thrive in the same space, in the same community. And one of the trainings, unfortunately, has been pushed back, that was about to occur in our community as well, around bias policing, was involving the community with our administrative staff from our police department. So it's really involving people along on the journey, and I think that's huge. And not also, providing a structure of this is how we're going to have this conversation, but posing the question. We'd like to have a conversation. We would like to build trust, and together as a community, and maybe it just starts as a few people, how do we do that and how do we go about that? And in my experience, what you think might be the process and what the process actually ends up being when you involve the people who are most impacted usually looks very different. So I think that's really key.
I would just quickly add, Imagine Fox Cities, the regional visioning initiative that I'm involved with, is sponsoring currently a series of convening conversations on community and policing. The first one looked at sort of a historical look at policing. The next one will look at sort of current challenges and will be more of a discussion and dialogue. And the last will look at how we can chart a different course together in the region as it relates to these issues. So Imagine Fox Cities, if you want to go to the website and find out some information about how you can be involved in those conversations in our community that are happening now.
There is a link in the chat, and I have attended the first series. Very informative, Jean.
Thank you.
And I also wanted to add, thank you, Dr. Barrett, for that shout out of working with Chief Todd Thomas at Appleton Police Department. I just shared in the chat also a very recent situation, just happened 4 days ago, obviously, since my departure from the city, but to point out that this community policing is got to be ongoing work. And so much of it is now being intertwined into my new field of endeavor, which is mental health. And to APD's credit, that's one of the things that he is now earmarking more of his police officer dollars toward, which is actually hiring mental health officers, yes, with police background, specifically able to help de-escalate even beyond the years of de-escalation training that's gone on with the City of Appleton's police department. That's where true community policing takes place. That's now taking it to a whole nother level, which is actually employing behavioral specialists, mental health specialists inside of our police departments to help de-escalate situations beyond just sending out highly enforced police with enforcement equipment, but rather how do we meet people where they are, find out what their mental health needs are, and help de-escalate the situation like that. So just wanted to share that as well. Thank you for the question.
Thank you. Tammy also had a question. It says, how do we support our daughters in these spaces? As a transracial adoptive mother, I want to support my 9-year-old with some of the complexities she is experiencing, but I am not sure how to best do that. Any suggestions?
I would
Yes, she needs to join Umoja, contact African Health, African Heritage Incorporated. They have an entire organizational circle of support for multiracial transnational families, and there's an entire program, a year-long program that they do with African Heritage Incorporated called Umoja.
Karen stole my thunder, but I would have gave the same plug. It's a really good resource. And I also want to share for those who are at UW Oshkosh, March 1st through March 5th, I will be hosting Multiracial Awareness Week, and we will have a speaker come in about transracial adoption who owns a private practice here in Milwaukee where I live, and all of her counselors are transracial adoptees themselves. So we'll be having that presentation that week. So more information to come.
Thank you. And then Amy Anderson asked, could you speak to the helpful and unhelpful behaviors and actions for allies in equity and inclusion efforts?
Can you say the question one more time?
Yes. Could you speak to the helpful and unhelpful behaviors and actions for allies in equity and inclusion efforts?
Go ahead, Karen.
Since I'm chomping at the bit over here, I must quote my immediate past predecessor, Kathy Flores, statewide director of Diverse and Resilient for the LGBTQ community. When we had the protests in the city of Appleton over the summer, Black and Allies, along with Pride, she said, okay, white people, and she's white, Hispanic, and she said, you all step in the back and stop taking over the mic from the people of color who, the Black Lives activists who have organized this protest. And so I'm going to be as direct as Kathy has said it to me. And she's my sister in diversity as well. And she just keeps it real. So to answer that question directly, it's helpful to be present, but be leery of your own behavior that it does not slide into white saviorism. And those of us in the field, we know what that means. And so if you need some help with that, we can help you with that. So that's kind of the watch out, is to be there, be present, be helpful, but try not to take over and truly be an ally and not take the front seat. So that would be my piece of advice. Go ahead, Dr. Grady.
You stole my thunder again. I echo everything you just said. I currently live in Milwaukee and I'm commuted up to Oshkosh. And so over the summer, I'm a licensed counselor and I was providing counseling services to those who had experienced racial trauma over the summer and participating in some activism. And when I came to Oshkosh, one of the first things I noticed is how many Black Lives Matter signs there were. There were more in Oshkosh than there were in my community in Milwaukee. And it's really because it was their lived experience. They didn't want to, who are they going to ask for their lives to matter when everybody they see is Black around them? And so I started asking myself, are we taking up spaces sometimes when we are wanting to be activists in a space that's really is a paradox because we want to help, but we're not the person intended for the help to be. So I think the biggest thing I tell people is if you directly profit from your privilege, don't do it in the space that would harm marginalized groups and particularly Black people. So an example would be, over the summer, there were a lot of people who all of a sudden were experts in anti-racism, diversity, equity, inclusion. And I would say that's great. Are you an ally or are you using the movement for profit? Are you helping or are you harming? Are you hurting? Or are you miseducating? And sometimes I tell people Black people are doing things that don't need your opinion or approval. Just let them be. When you come into the space, it shuts down sometimes or removes oxygen from the space that no longer allows it to be what it was intended for. So just give up space, I think would be the biggest thing. Are you giving up space? Are you giving up your seat when your seat needs to be given up to somebody who come in with a lived experience and share their lived experience and add value to what diversity is? I think sometimes we think diversity is representation of a person. So if we get a Black person in the room, then we're diverse and we can talk about diversity issues. But diversity is a group. The group has to be diverse for you to talk about diversity. You can't just have representation. Those are two different things. So make sure you're giving up space for diversity in a group.
Yeah, I would just quickly add that when you do speak, and there are times when it's important for you to speak up, speak for yourself and don't speak for other groups. Don't talk about what other people are feeling. Talk about how you're feeling and how this impacts you. So that's just something that I quickly add, and I'm going to have to get off the panel, but thank you, all of my sisters, my partners in crime.
Thank you.
I appreciate all of you, and I appreciate all the folks who are listening in the audience. So thank you for being part of this today.
Yeah, if I could just jump in, Dr. Barrett, that's exactly what I was going to say is speak for yourself. And so one of the quotes that one of the values in doing our work is that you can only lead the work as far as you're willing to go yourself. And so not telling others stories, if you were impacted by a story of a friend or someone who has experienced marginalization or discrimination or alienation, isolation, anything like that, really your sharing is about how you experienced that person sharing the story, not actually telling the story of somebody else. And so I think that's really important because that's not helpful. And I think sometimes it feels like it's helpful. Like if I, in my circle of friends, could tell you about someone else I know, you find that helpful. And I really think that that's much more harmful. So just on the heels of that, I wanted to share that thought and really going by that, the value that you can only lead the work as far as you're willing to go yourself. And so also making sure you're doing the work.
Thank you, thank you, thank you so much. Unfortunately, I am not going to be able to get to all the questions. So what I'm going to do is get those other 2 questions on there from Kirsten and Samara, and then I will email them to you all. And then if you have responses, I'll forward them to them if that's okay.
That sounds like a great plan.
Okay, perfect. And then, so I want to just close out by saying thank you so much. It has been a privilege hearing your responses and experience and also moderating this event. I on so many levels can relate to you all, and I just want to thank you so much for taking the time out to be here during your busy day. And wanted to know if you all had any last thoughts before we close out here.
I would just thank you for your leadership, Amisha. And I know sometimes it's not easy to moderate a panel. So thank you. Thank you for your leadership and your willingness to support us.
Perfect. Well, I want to let everyone know that the recording will be available by the end of the day at UWO's Women's Center on their YouTube page. And then please fill out the evaluation form if you all have time.
Thank you.
And that will be in the chat box.
Thank you
all
again
so
for
much.
inviting me,
Have a
and
good
so
day.
nice to meet our newest members, adding all of our shoulders to the wheel in this work. It takes all of us to keep it moving forward. Thank you again for inviting me.
We will miss Karen in the Fox Valleys, but
I'm still here right now.
I will come find you. You already know that. I'll come find you.
I do.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.